Let me introduce Dottie so we can get moving. Dottie St. Amant has been employed as the Executive Director of the Alvin A. Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center since 1997. She has 22 years' experience working with individuals and families affected by Alzheimer's disease and other aging issues. She received her Bachelor of Arts from Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and her Master of Social Work with a concentration in Policy, Planning, and Administration from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Ms. St. Amant is also a licensed nursing home administrator in Florida and in Michigan, and a member of the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. In her position of Executive Director of the Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center, Ms. St. Amant has provided Alzheimer's training to both family and professional caregivers, as well as other professionals groups such as healthcare providers, certified public accountants, certified financial planners, attorneys, trust officers, clergy, law enforcement, and emergency workers. Also, you have a column, don't you, in the
I do.
In the Tuesday health section.
Who reads it? Excellent.
We have some readers.
Do you have a gift for them today? No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. The Tuesday health section in the News Press.
Yes,
I've been reading your column.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So let's give a warm welcome to Dottie.
Thank you. All right, and I bet you thought I was barely over 22, right? Just kidding. I'm in my 40s, and I have been working in the field of aging, as Craig said, for over 22 years. And it's my pleasure to be able to be here with you this morning and talk to you a little bit about concerns that you might have about forgetfulness or about what's going to happen to your memory as you start to age. And I'm going to hopefully give you some tips to take home with you about what you can do about that, and talk to you just a little bit at the end about what our agency does here in Lee County. First of all, I want to point out that our center is one of the United Way agencies of Lee County, and so I thank Craig's firm for being so supportive of United Way and all of our agencies. And I also thank all of you for taking a minute to fill out my paperwork. It really helps me to be able to report back to United Way when they come to see us each year about who we're giving education to and how we're spending the dollars that people in the community so generously donate to us. So if you don't mind filling those forms out for me, I'd really appreciate it. And there's a sign-in sheet coming around that I'd also appreciate if you just take a minute to fill that out. All right, so who is concerned about their memory? Anybody concerned about being forgetful besides Craig? Okay, excellent. All right. Well, I have to confess, and Craig probably read this in my column, that I couldn't find my keys on a Monday morning either one day, and that's because I didn't put them back where they belong. And that's one of the very important messages that I think you'll hear as I talk about what's normal and what's not, is that there's things that we can do to manage our memory and try to help be able to remember the things that we want to remember. And one important mantra to remember is that there's a place for everything, and everything needs to be in its place if we want to be able to find things and remember. So typically when I come home, I have a hook in my kitchen where I hang my keys, but I didn't do that one Sunday afternoon. I laid them down in the garage when I was unloading the car, and so I too couldn't find my keys on a Monday morning. So there's one little tip for you already, first thing off the top, that if you want to try to remember where things are, you've got to be a little more organized and put things in the right place so that you can go to that spot and be able to find it when you want it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about normal aging and what happens to our memory as we age. And again, there's a lot of things that happen to us physically and cognitively as we age. That doesn't mean that we have illnesses like Alzheimer's disease. You know, there's just some normal things that happen as a part of aging. One of the things that happens as we begin to age is that we have a shorter attention span. And that process of being able to take in information, store it in our brain, and be able to recall it later, that whole process slows down. That does not mean that we have Alzheimer's disease or that we have a serious illness like Alzheimer's disease. That's a normal part of aging, that the process slows down. How many of you use a computer? Anybody in the room? Lots of people in the room use a computer. I often compare this whole process about normal aging to what we deal with a computer. How many of you have a computer that's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years old? Okay, is it a little slow? Is it slower than it was when you first bought it? Okay, and that's because as it gets older, that slows down, and the more stuff we load into that computer, programs and files and things, the longer it's going to take the computer to pull up what we want when we're trying to tell it what to do. Same thing with our brain. Some of you have 50, 60 years worth of memories stored in your brain or information, right? Some more than 50 or 60, right? She's smiling at me like that's really generous to think that that's all I have. So think about, if you have that many years of memories and information stored in your brain, of course it's going to take you longer to recall it than someone who's 15 or 20 years old, right? So think about that it's kind of like a computer. As it gets older, it slows down. Doesn't mean we have an illness. Sometimes computers do and they crash, right? And I'm going to talk about sometimes our brains do have illnesses and it affects them severely, and that's what we call Alzheimer's disease and some other forms of dementia. Okay, so as we grow older, it's going to take us longer to recall information, takes longer to learn new information and process information, and the whole process slows down. Doesn't mean we can't learn new things, it just means it's a little bit harder. That leads me to, we have a greater need to use memory aids. And memory aids are things like what I said, that there's a place for everything and everything in its place. That's one way that we can use memory aids, is that we have places for things and we label things. We label our files. We label organizational cabinets or things that we have in our homes to be able to find things when we want to find them and put our fingertip on it right when we want to have it rather than searching all over. How many of you would say you're really organized and you don't have trouble finding things? Okay. Anybody willing to share how you do that? What makes it so successful? You're anal, okay. You're anal about it, so you make sure everything gets back in its place. Okay, excellent. All right, well, the message is we need to use memory aids. I have a planner with me, and that planner is what told me for the past month that I needed to be here by 8:30 this morning to be able to speak with you at 9 o'clock. I use it faithfully. It's my portable brain. If I leave my house in the morning without that planner, I'm in big trouble because I don't spend the day in my office most days. So, that's a big problem for me if I don't have my planner and know where I'm supposed to go. We use notes. How many of you use notes to write down what you need from the grocery store? Okay, you make a list to go to the grocery store. Some people are so anal about it that they organize their grocery list according to how the store is laid out. Does anybody do that? Okay, you are an anal group. All right, well, the important thing is memory aids are very important. So things like a grocery list are going to help us be able to remember what we want from the store once we get there. But what happens if you forget the list at home? You get a lot of stuff that you don't need, she says in the front row. And what happens when you get home if the one thing that you really need was a gallon of milk? You don't have it in your bag, do you? Okay. All right, well, I'm going to give you a little tip about how to overcome that if that happens to you. We do want to make our grocery list, and we want to try to remember to take that list with us. But if you forget to take the list, try to think about what was on the list in terms of categories. And those of you who organize the list by the layout of the grocery store, this is probably going to be easier for you. But you want to think in terms of categories. So if you're standing in the dairy department, that you're only thinking about what on my list was from this department. It helps you to be able to focus in and figure out what from the dairy department was on my list without trying to think about the whole store and the whole list all at once. All right, that'll help you win those memory games when you go to bridal showers too, if you do that. When they bring out a tray of things that have to do with a newlywed or a bride or getting married, and then they take it away and ask you to recall as many items as possible. Well, you need to think in categories. And frankly, when I talk about how we test for Alzheimer's disease, some of the memory tests incorporate some of those strategies of how to remember things. They ask you to name as many animals as you can name. Well, people who have severe memory problems aren't going to be able to name very many, but people who are cognitively well can think of several, and lots of times the way you can be most successful is because you're thinking in terms of categories when you're naming those kinds of things. Okay, so just a couple of reminders that the normal changes that are associated with aging rarely affect a person's general competence or functioning. Okay, we can be forgetful and occasionally forget where our keys are and it delays us in the morning, but that doesn't mean it interferes with our ability to function during the day, right? We still can carry on our life and live a normal life. I also want to remind you from the previous slide that slowing down, the process of storing and remembering information, having that slow down is normal aging. What's not normal aging is Alzheimer's disease. And one of the most important things that we talk about in our public education program is getting that message out that Alzheimer's disease is not normal aging. And we don't want people to dismiss the warning signs and not get proper evaluation and treatment for the illness because it is a disease that attacks the brain. It's not a normal part of aging. Okay, so what causes normal forgetfulness? Some of the things that cause normal forgetfulness are trying to remember too many things at once. Lack of sleep. If we don't get a good night's rest, we can't think as well as we would have if we had rested. Poor nutrition or dehydration. Really important things to remember because we live in a hot, humid environment most of the year and can very easily become dehydrated. I always carry a bottle of water with me because it's amazing what dehydration can do to your functioning, to your physical functioning, and what it does to your ability to think. Stress. Too many things going on, or stressors that are happening in your life. A move, a major move, career change, the death of a family member, divorce, all those kinds of major life stressors can cause you to be even more forgetful and have trouble thinking cognitively. Does not mean that you have serious signs of a disease like Alzheimer's disease. Multitasking, I think all of us are guilty of that in today's fast-paced society. But I've been reading more and more lately about studies that say that we really are way less productive when we're trying to do more than one thing at a time than if we would just stop and finish one thing and then go on to the next. And I totally agree and confess that I'm guilty of that I may be on the phone with someone and I'm looking at emails or writing notes on my desk or something like that. So not if you guys called me, believe me. If you called me, I would have my total attention on you. But so, more and more the research is showing us that multitasking isn't getting us any farther ahead. So we need to slow down and take one thing at a time if we really want to use our memory to the maximum benefit. All right, so let me talk for a few minutes about what is Alzheimer's disease and why we want to make sure that people pay attention to the warning signs. And then I'm going to talk to you about what can we do to try to live a healthy lifestyle and make healthy lifestyle choices that will help to try to manage our memory for longer into the life course. All right, so some warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. What's the classic warning sign of Alzheimer's disease or symptom that everybody thinks of when we say the word Alzheimer's? What's the normal thing that you think of? Memory, exactly. And someone said wandering, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But memory, everybody thinks it's forgetfulness and that the person can't remember short-term things that have happened. That's very true. That is a classic warning sign of Alzheimer's disease, but it's not the only thing that's happening to the person who has Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. Other difficulties that they have are problems with orientation, and that's where wandering comes in. Who said wandering? Very good answer. Because what happens when a person has Alzheimer's disease is that their orientation is impaired. And so they can't navigate their way around familiar places. And in the early stages, it starts with things like they get lost driving places. Or they're a walker and they've always walked the same route in their neighborhood, and then one day it takes them an hour and a half to find their way back home because their orientation is impaired. It gets progressively worse in the illness where they can't find things around the house that are very common objects that they ought to know where they are, or rooms, like they may not be able to find the bathroom even though they've lived in that house for 20 years. So orientation is a problem. So is language. In the earlier stages, they begin to have word finding problems. So they have difficulty finding the right word to say what they want to say in a conversation, or the ability to take in the information that you're saying to them, process it, and respond to you slows down, and it takes them much longer, much more so than what I talked about in normal aging. As the disease progresses, it gets progressively worse. All of these things get progressively worse to the point where they will be responding to your conversation totally inappropriately. You ask a question about one subject and they answer about something totally different. Or they say words that make no sense or that aren't really words. They have trouble performing routine tasks or jobs, duties around the house. In the early stages, we see warning signs like not being able to manage their finances, making poor judgment or poor choices about routine tasks like balancing the checkbook or paying bills. And so sometimes, very sadly, we hear about people who have given away a bunch of money to fraudulent charities, or they send it to the sweepstakes that they get in the mail, and their family doesn't know they're doing it, and pretty soon a lot of their money is gone. And nobody knows what happened to it because they were experiencing early stages of Alzheimer's disease, and no one was really noticing those warning signs, and unfortunately they've lost a lot of money. Or we have situations where they will they'll send a check with the sweepstakes, and then they throw away their utility bill. And so pretty soon the adult children are noticing that, boy, mom is having a tough time. I can't understand why the electricity company is sending her notices of turning off her electricity. She doesn't have a problem with finances, but yet she didn't pay the bill. She threw it away. So those are some early signs in the very early stages. And again, all of those get progressively worse to the point where a routine task like brushing our teeth becomes difficult or impossible for a person in the middle stages of Alzheimer's disease. And in the later stages, they absolutely can't give themselves daily care, their total care, and often under hospice care at the end of life. They have poor judgment and lack of insight. They think of things very concretely. They can't think of the big picture abstractly. And that becomes a problem with communication, because not only are they having word finding problems and processing information, but also their judgment is impaired. And they have lack of insight, and so they aren't able to make good choices for themselves. And when you try to communicate with them and reason with them, it's difficult or impossible, because that part of their brain that allows them to think abstractly and understand reality and reasoning is damaged. And so it doesn't matter how many times you try to make the argument to a person with Alzheimer's, you are not going to win. And that's one of the really important lessons that we talk to people about, caregivers who come and seek our help through the center, is that you don't win an argument with a person with Alzheimer's disease. So we have to change how we communicate with them and change how we approach them so that we make life easier for them and then easier for the caregiver. Because how frustrating is that if someone's always arguing back and forth? And pretty soon the person with Alzheimer's gets so frustrated that they start to act out and become belligerent, because that's the only way they can get across to the others that they've had enough and they can't, comprehend the situation. All right, we also see changes in personality and mood and behavior. Early on, it's not uncommon for them to have some depression or the blues, because it is tough to hear that diagnosis and think, what am I going to do now? But I'm going to tell you at the end of this presentation what our agency does to help those people. We also see that they become more isolated, they become more suspicious. They don't really understand at every moment what's truly going on in the situation. And so if they can't find something that they are sure was in that drawer, you must have taken it, because you were the only person here with me yesterday, and my $100 bill was in that drawer, so you must have stolen my $100 bill. They're very suspicious and very accusatory of even the people that they love the most, because of what's happening in the brain and the damage to the brain. All right, so why do we care so much about paying attention to the warning signs of Alzheimer's? Well, first of all, I want to go back to what I said, that it's not a normal part of aging. So we want to make sure that people understand this is a disease that attacks the brain. And just like if we had trouble with our heart, or if we had colitis or Crohn's disease or any other kind of illness, we would go to a specialist and get it checked out. We wouldn't just take word from our internist that says, well, I think you have Crohn's disease, and so here, take some Imodium and go home. We wouldn't do that. We would go on to the gastroenterologist and get proper treatment. And we feel the same way about signs of Alzheimer's disease. It is a disease that attacks the brain. It's irreversible and it's progressive. And so we want to make sure that people get a proper evaluation. Early detection is really important, because sometimes when people begin to see changes in their memory, they might have something that we call mild cognitive impairment. It can be a precursor to Alzheimer's disease. It's more exaggerated forgetfulness than normal aging, but it's not the same kind of impairments that I just listed off in terms of Alzheimer's disease. However, we are concerned about those people because we want to help them learn about memory aids and how to improve the quality of life every day, but we also want them to get early detection and treatment, because many times about 50% of those cases will turn to Alzheimer's disease within a few years. So we want to pay attention as early as possible about what's going on cognitively with changes in a person. There's also the term dementia. How many of you have heard that term dementia? Family members say, my dad has dementia, or you hear doctors and nurses say it. Dementia is a medical term that we use to describe that a person has a loss of intellectual functioning. It simply means that the person is having confusion and disorientation, and it's so bad that they can't function on a daily basis normally. They're making bad choices, they're not able to take care of themselves, something's going on. Sometimes that happens because of another illness that can be treated, and we often call it delirium in those cases, because what happens is it becomes on very suddenly, and it's a dramatic change in the person in terms of their behavior, irritability, being uncooperative, just generally kind of belligerent, and we notice that they just seem like they don't feel well. Well, probably that confusion and disorientation goes along with that they don't feel well because something's going on, like a urinary tract infection or an upper respiratory infection or thyroid problems, vitamin deficiencies. There's all kinds of things that are common illnesses that can easily be treated, and they can cause what we call reversible dementia or delirium. And so another good reason why we want to pay attention to the early warning signs. It may be something serious that needs to be treated, but it might not be Alzheimer's disease, and we want to try to figure that out. And then of course there's several different forms of irreversible illnesses, dementia, which Alzheimer's disease is the most common form. And then we have other irreversible dementias like Lewy body dementia. How many of you ever heard that term, Lewy body dementia? Okay, a couple people in the room have. And then there's vascular dementia. Those are the three most prominent that we see. And sometimes I have a neuropsychologist on my advisory board, Dr. Mabel Lopez, who does the testing for memory. And sometimes in her presentation she'll say, Alzheimer's has a lot of friends. Sometimes he likes to hang around with Lewy body. Sometimes he likes to hang around with vascular dementia. So complicating the medical picture even more is that sometimes someone doesn't have just one form of those dementias, they might have two going on. So just to give you, I'm not going to talk a lot about the different dementias, but to tell you what Lewy body dementia is, it has features that are like Parkinson's disease and features that are like Alzheimer's disease. So it's almost like looking at a person who has Alzheimer's disease, and they also have things that look like Parkinson's, like trouble with their gait, shuffling along, tremors. They also are very sensitive to the medications that we use for behavior management for Alzheimer's. It can make their symptoms worse. So there's many reasons why we want the doctors to be able to figure out what form of dementia they think it is. So how do we diagnose it? Well, I've already said that I think it's really important that we not just go to the internist, and there's not anything wrong with going to your internist, but that needs to be the starting place. If the internist thinks that you have Alzheimer's disease, you need to go on to a specialist, and the specialist team that diagnoses Alzheimer's disease is ideally made up of a neurologist, the medical doctor, who can do the history and physical and the medical workup like brain imaging tests, MRIs or CAT scans to see if there's any changes in the brain. And also a neurologist or a neuropsychologist who is a PhD doctor. That doctor can't prescribe medications, but they will do the extensive neuropsych testing, which takes 2 or 3 hours to really sit down with the person and test their orientation and recall and memory and try to figure out what's going on. Does this look characteristic of Lewy body dementia? Does it look characteristic of Alzheimer's disease? Is it severe clinical depression? What's going on with this person that's causing this kind of confusion and disorientation? Really critical, in my opinion, after working in the field for so long, that a person get this comprehensive workup. That's how we can be 90 to 95% accurate with the diagnosis. The only way we know for sure what was causing the dementia is for the family to be willing to do an autopsy after the person dies. Then a pathologist can look at the brain and be able to tell for sure what form of dementia the person had. That's how we often know that people can have more than one form. Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body, or Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, which I'm not sure if I said. I've already forgotten if I said, but vascular dementia is caused by strokes. When people have a series of many strokes, there's damage to the brain each time one of those strokes happens, and it often leads to what we call vascular dementia. All right, so a couple of statistics for you. In the United States, we have between 4 and 5 million people with Alzheimer's disease. It seems like a lot, doesn't it? A lot of people. And here in Lee County, estimated number of cases, 22,000. That is a lot, right? That's a lot of people to have in one county where we're trying to provide services to. And that's because we're a retirement community. We have a high number of people retiring here and older people aging here. And age is a risk factor. I've said a couple times, Alzheimer's disease is not a normal part of aging. However, age is a risk factor. As we grow older, the greatest risk of getting Alzheimer's disease is the years that we have behind us. So Dr. Newland says don't have any more birthdays if you don't want to get Alzheimer's disease, right? Like we could choose that. And he also says be careful who you pick for your parents because family history can increase your risk. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. It means it increases your risk. Okay, so the other scary thing is that as the baby boomers begin to age, they're already the oldest ones are already turning 60 and into their early 60s. We expect those numbers to triple by the year 2050. So really all of us, if we aren't already affected by Alzheimer's disease, everyone's either going to be someone with Alzheimer's disease or a caregiver for somebody with Alzheimer's disease or somehow closely related to that. All right, and also an interesting statistic, the age group of people 85 and older is the fastest growing segment of our population right now. So we're going to have more challenges in terms of providing services and medical treatments for people who are having difficulty with their memory as they age. Anybody have questions for me about Alzheimer's disease? Because I'm going to turn the table to a little bit happier, more positive thought about how can we manage our memory. Yes, ma'am.
I recently read the term late onset Alzheimer's disease. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, she asked what is late onset Alzheimer's disease. Okay. We talk in general in layman's terms when we're educating people and talking with them about where they are on the caregiving journey. First of all, we talk about early, middle, and late stages of Alzheimer's disease. Everybody experiences the early stages. A lot of people experience the middle stages unless they die of some other reason, and a lot of people experience the late stages. The course of that illness can last 2 to 20 years. An average length of time is about 7 or 8 years. So think about that a person can be on this journey for 20 years, and it's a slow, progressive illness. The average length of time from diagnosis is 7 to 8 years. But I've been working at the center for 12 years, and I know a lot of people who are still alive who I met in the early days of my career at the center. All right, so you asked what's late onset. We talk about the stages, so you hear me say people with early stage. That's different than early onset, and we've also started to call it young onset, and this is going to answer the other part of your question. Young onset are people who start to show the signs and symptoms in younger years, like in their 40s and 50s. Those are usually families who truly have a genetic mutation. They account for about 3% of all of the cases for Alzheimer's disease, where it's a family who truly has a genetic mutation. It's passed on from generation to generation, and they experience young onset or early onset, different than early stage. Everybody has early stage at some point, but people who have early onset are younger people who are getting Alzheimer's disease. Excuse me. So the majority of people are late onset, in their 60s, 70s, or early 80s. There was one other question about Alzheimer's.
How can we compare the United States with other countries in the world?
That's a really good question. There's Alzheimer's disease everywhere. You know, we're not the only country dealing with it, but some countries have a lower prevalence rate. And one of them that comes to my mind is India. And they do a lot of research studies about, is it the curry that they use in their food that's helping them to prevent Alzheimer's disease? You know, we chuckle about it, but really I'm going to talk to you about lifestyle choices and some of the environmental factors that increase our risk of Alzheimer's disease. I'll take a couple more questions, and then I'm going to finish this part, and I'll take more questions at the end.
I've heard that 85 is sort of a break point. After 85, your chances of getting Alzheimer's
Are less so. That's right. That's right. That period of time between like 65 to 85 is a bigger risk. And people over the age of 65, about 10% are affected. Every time we add 5 years to that age, the number doubles. So by the time you get to people who are about 85, about half are affected, but half are not, because it's not a normal part of aging. And once you're past that, if you're in your 90s, anybody want to acknowledge that they're in their 90s? I would if I were you, if someone's here in the room. If you get to be 90, 100 years old and you don't have Alzheimer's disease, you probably have pretty good genes and made some good choices. Okay, one last question, and then I'm going to do the part. Well, that's what I was just talking about with the young onset and the people who truly have a genetic mutation. It's hereditary for those people, but that only accounts for about 3% of all the cases. The majority of the cases of Alzheimer's disease are a combination of things, which is a good segue. We should have planted you in the office with that, or in the audience with that question, to lead into what can we do to make healthy lifestyle choices to try to lower our risks, because things that we do that affect our health in terms of our heart also affect our brain health. And I wrote my column yesterday about that for next Tuesday's paper. All right, so it's very important for you to exercise your mind. How many of you do Sudoku puzzles? Excellent. Well, Sudoku puzzles is a great way to keep your mind active and to help your memory, but you want to make sure that you choose an activity that you like to do. So if there's people in the audience who really don't like to do Sudoku, then I'm not advising that you do that, because we want you to pick activities that are going to be pleasurable for you. You're going to be more likely to do it then, and that's going to be a way to make sure that you're exercising your mind and keeping active in that manner. How many of you exercise on a regular basis physically? Excellent. This is an excellent group. All right, very good. Even just walking 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week is going to help you. It's going to help your heart, which also helps your brain. We want to eat, drink, and be healthy. Choose a healthy, balanced diet. How many people in the room think they have a healthy, balanced diet? Okay, good, excellent. Fruits and vegetables are full of antioxidants. And those antioxidants reduce inflammation and reduce the risk of heart disease and brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease. So you want to make sure. What are some of the best fruits to eat? Anybody know? I heard blueberries. Blueberries are excellent. Blueberries are full of antioxidants. So are cherries. When I was doing a little research on the internet yesterday, I saw that a lot of the heart studies talk about eating cherries.
Broccoli.
Broccoli is good, yes. It's excellent for you. So you wanted to try to incorporate those things into your diet. And here's my other tip for you. Blueberries and cherries, those kinds of fruits that have a lot of antioxidants in them, if you can eat the frozen versions, you're getting a lot more benefit, because they take those and freeze them at their peak of ripeness, where most of the powerful antioxidants are. And so you get more benefit from it if you eat the frozen version, because we have no idea how long they sat in the grocery store before you bought them and took them home and let them sit on your counter for a day or two. So it's okay, and even probably better to eat the frozen version. How about fish? Anybody incorporate fish in their diet? Excellent. The omega-3 fatty acids are excellent sources of nutrients to help prevent or lower your risk. I should say lower your risk, because we don't know of a way to totally prevent Alzheimer's disease from happening. Salmon. Salmon is excellent. And I heard Dr. Lopez say just a couple weeks ago when she was with us that the wild version is better for you than the farm raised. All right. We also want to try to avoid carrying a lot of extra fat in our abdominal region, and that gets harder as we age, right? Especially for women associated with our hormones, we often have, that's where it settles. We want to try to reduce that, because that causes what the doctors refer to as a metabolic syndrome that increases your risk of high cholesterol, high blood pressure, things that then lead to cardiac problems that can lead to problems with your memory. Drink in moderation. It's okay to drink alcohol, but in moderation. And a really important thing to think about as we age is that our body changes. We metabolize things differently. We metabolize alcohol differently and medications differently. And so you can't, even though it's okay to drink alcohol, you've got to account for the fact that you're older and your body's different. And so the amount that you drank in your 30s, even if it was 2 or 3 cocktails on Friday night with your friends, may not be the same as what you can drink in your older years because your body metabolizes it differently. So we want to make sure that it's okay to have a drink, but not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 every day or several times during the week. Red wine is excellent because why? Antioxidants in the red grapes, yes. Okay, smoking. Smoking, we all know, is harmful for our general overall health. It's also harmful for our brain health because of all of the things that I'm talking about in terms of other illnesses. Cardiac illnesses increases our risk for dementia. Learn relaxation techniques. Anybody practice yoga or go for a walk on the beach on a regular basis? Do you do yoga? Tai Chi, excellent. Tai Chi is excellent. That not only is helping you with relaxation, but it's helping you with balance. And I'm here to talk about Alzheimer's disease, but I was at a coalition meeting yesterday morning, and I was surprised to learn that the leading cause of death in our county is from falls. Can you believe that? Not car accidents, not heart disease or cancer, but falls. Injuries from falls. And so Tai Chi is excellent, especially as we age, to incorporate not only for stress management and relaxation, but to improve your balance. All right, keeping a positive attitude. I always say be around the people that make you feel good about yourself and make you laugh and feel happy. If you have someone that's just bringing you down all the time, that's going to wear away at your body's ability to have a strong immune system and fight off illnesses. So you want to keep a positive attitude and be around people who are positive and make you feel good. If you have any concerns about your health or your memory, you need to talk to your doctor. Ask for a memory screening. If anybody's concerned about it, you can call our office. We'll tell you where to get a memory screening. Sometimes our social workers aren't in the community doing memory screenings, and lots of times we partner with Lee Memory Care to do those free memory screenings that are helpful for the neuropsychologist to know if you need to come in for the comprehensive workup. And then, of course, I've said a lot about the link between heart illness and your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So you want to make sure that, and also diabetes increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So you want to make sure that you're checking your blood pressure, cholesterol, and sugar levels on a regular basis and talking to your doctor about those, because those are not only affecting your other health conditions, but what will happen with your memory. Did you have a question, sir?
Yes, I hate to call you. You've got a little bit farther ahead than I wish you had.
Uh-huh.
But I wanted to ask you a question.
Okay.
Salmon.
Salmon?
They say the salmon that's in the wild is better than
Yes.
farm raised. And the reason I ask this question is because of all the pollutants, mercury, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why is wild better than farm raised?
You know, I don't know for sure. I would be happy to research that and email Craig if he wants to get that answer out to you. I just read a blurb in the Sunday paper the other day, a short sentence about it, but I don't know the research behind why they think the wild is better, but you have very good points about you know, how water is contaminated.
I know the shark is good, but it's so full of mercury.
Yeah.
So that's what I was curious
Yeah.
about.
Very good question. I'll try to find out and email Craig. Yes.
I think the farm raised has a lot of the pesticide runoff that comes into the lakes.
Yeah. Did you hear that? See, someone's done the research for me.
Not a true farm raised fish.
Right, but you got to be careful, you know, with everything you buy, because the labels on food can be deceiving, right? Okay. All right, so other ways to help improve your memory. Going back to my very first slide, we need to use memory aids. Develop a system of reminders and cues. Now, I'm not suggesting that you be like the squirrel on the Post-it note commercial and have Post-it notes plastered everywhere, because if you have too many of those little notes, they get confusing and you overlook them, right? So you got to figure out a system. And I will tell you that when we're working with people who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's, who are still very high functioning and living independently, we get them to start using those even more so. So before they go to bed at night, we tell them to mark the day off on their calendar so that they have a better chance of knowing what the day is each day. So we just, as we age, we keep using memory aids more and more to our advantage. Take time to remember things. You got to remove distractions. You know, if you were side talking in here and only half listening to me, you wouldn't remember half of what I said later. You won't remember all of it anyway, right? But you would have less of a chance to remember it if you had distractions. So you want to take time to remember the things that you want to remember. And be social and active. Having a strong social support network helps us as we age to stay healthy and to keep our brains active. So be social and active. Okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about our agency, and tell you what we do in terms of services. But the man in the yellow shirt, I think you raised your hand and had a question for me. Did you have a question?
Well, I was concerned about the difference between short-term memory and long-term memory. Where's the dividing line?
Well, short-term memory is really something that just happened. You know, like you just registered out there and you don't remember that you registered. Something that short of go. And when somebody has Alzheimer's disease, the short-term memory goes first, but the long-term memory from way in distant past stays for a longer period of time. It's like this disease is robbing them and turning the clock backward, taking things away from them that they learned and knew most recently, and keeping the longer-term memories for a long time. So we'll see sometimes, like I had a lady crying in support group the other day because she's caring for her mom, and her mom often mistakes her for her aunt instead of her. Like she thinks, the woman who has Alzheimer's thinks it's her sister instead of her daughter. It's heartbreaking for the daughter. But it's very realistic in terms of Alzheimer's disease, because that woman is probably thinking back to the time when she and her sister were about that age, and so she thinks that's her sister. And if she's thinking that, she can't comprehend the fact that she would have a daughter that age at this point in time. So that can happen with Alzheimer's disease quite often. All right, I'll just spend, yes?
Just one question.
Uh-huh.
I have sort of a theory on which you touched just before.
Mm.
And that is that one of my problems is that I don't listen.
Mhm.
Don't listen, concentrate on listening. You can't remember because you don't know it.
That's right. He's saying if you don't listen, you can't remember the information later.
You've got to focus on listening, like to a sermon.
Mm-hmm.
That's
That's right.
Listen to the preacher, you don't know what, you can't remember what he said.
That's right. That's exactly right. You have to really listen if you want to be able to remember later. And if you're taking notes, that's even better. Because not only are you listening, but you're writing it down. And you may never go back and look at those notes, but just writing it down is going to help you to be able to remember it later. Okay, yes.
What you stated a moment ago about the mother thinking the daughter was a sister,
Uh-huh.
when that type of thing occurs, how should that be handled? Should you just accept that, or should you correct it, or try to correct it?
Well, I encourage families to accept it in terms of joining their journey at that moment and reminisce with them about whatever they're remembering about their happy times with their sister, or talk about it. But to try to convince them that at that moment you're not the sister is only going to frustrate and agitate them. And that's what the daughter said, that's what happened. You know, if I keep trying to say, no, Mom, I'm your daughter, I'm your daughter, then it just upsets the woman, and both of them then become very frustrated and upset. So what we tell them to do, and you don't have to out and out lie if you're uncomfortable with that, but what we tell them to do is to join their journey and go along with what they're saying and really focus on the reminiscing and the positive part of what's coming out of it, because that's really what the person is doing, is remembering happy moments or things that were important to them. Okay, our agency was established in 1995 in Lee County to help people who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or who are caring for a family member. It's named after Alvin A. Dubin because his widow gave us a very generous gift in 1995 to get the center started, and so the board changed the name of the agency to the Alvin A. Dubin Alzheimer's Resource Center. And so that's Zelda and Al Dubin. And the picture on the right is Zelda, probably about 10 years ago. She died in 2005, but up until her death, she was very involved with our organization in terms of being an advocate and donor and supporter of our center. As I said before, we're a local United Way agency. We are also a member of the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. But the really important thing to know about us is that we're very similar to United Way in terms of we focus on the local community. Every dollar that we raise is spent here to provide services for people in our county. And so we are governed by a local board of trustees who are professionals and leaders in the community who help us make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community and spending the donations wisely. Our mission is to provide education, information, and support for people who've been diagnosed and their caregivers, whether that's family caregivers or professional caregivers. And what we do every day is try to meet the needs of those 22,000 people who are out there challenged by living with Alzheimer's disease. So we do a lot of information referral to hook them up to, if they need legal advice, we refer them to attorneys. If they need long-term care placement, we help them find nursing homes and assisted living. If they need information about other United Way agencies that are going to help them with meals or transportation or homemaking services, then we help them with that. We have 2 social workers who also help them in terms of counseling by looking at what's going on in your situation and what do you need to do right now to face those challenges. We also do a lot of health education for different professionals in the community. We train first responders, firefighters, and police officers on how to deal with situations with people with Alzheimer's. We train bank tellers on paying attention to the warning signs and the risk of exploitation of people with Alzheimer's, because remember I talked about how they give away their money easily because they don't know any better. So we obviously train healthcare professionals and a lot of different groups of people who are providing care or services. And then we work with law enforcement and adult protective services to resolve crisis situations with people with Alzheimer's disease, where they've wandered away from home, like you were talking about earlier. We do all of this with a modest staff of 5 people, myself and our administrative assistant, and 3 program staff, our health educator who focuses on training the professionals, and our 2 social workers who go and facilitate support groups for family caregivers and take the calls from family caregivers. Our office is located on the property of the Alliance for the Arts on the corner of Colonial and McGregor inside the Edwards building. But we go out in the county and provide our services. We go to the people. So we have support groups all over the county. We have monthly support groups for caregivers who are caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease. We have the New Path program that's for people who've been diagnosed early enough that they know they have the illness and they want to learn and want to talk about it, and that's a key piece. They need to want to talk about it and want to learn about it to be in that group. We have a group that's very well attended for adult children who are caring for or helping their aging parents. And we have a group for families who have placed someone in an assisted living facility or a nursing home. And when we do that, because they have a lot of different questions and concerns once the person is in a long-term care facility. Those stars that are popping into the map is just an illustration of how we travel the county to provide our services. People do not have to come to us. Some people do come to us to meet with us, but we go all over the county from Pine Island to Sanibel to Bonita Springs to Lehigh Acres to North Fort Myers, Cape Coral, all over Fort Myers to be able to provide support groups for caregivers. In addition to our education that our health educator does and the social service work that our social workers do, we also have a speaker bureau, like I'm out speaking to you today about memory loss and about what our center does, and sometimes some of our board members come with me and talk about different things that have to do with medical treatment or research or memory loss. We have a lending library that's full of books and videotapes that we've purchased with grants from local resources like the Southwest Florida Community Foundation, the Medical Society Alliance, the Foulds Foundation, all different grants that allow us to do that. We also have a newsletter, and I brought some of these things with me today. They're outside on the registration table that you can get them on your way out. But we have a newsletter. We did change it to a quarterly format this year, and that's because we're trying to be more frugal about how we're spending donations. And so we still have the same kind of education and information in that newsletter, but we will put out 4 editions this year instead of 6. Also, one thing I want to tell you about that I think is really a great program that we have, because a lot of people think of us as an agency who only deals with the elderly or with middle-aged adults who are helping their elderly parents. But guess what? Those middle-aged adults have high school students at home who are also involved in the caregiving process and who are also affected by the fact that grandma or grandpa has Alzheimer's disease. And so about 6 years ago, we instituted a teen scholarship program with a local assisted living facility. It's now called Magnolia Court, where they do a fundraiser for us. And this year's fundraiser is tomorrow. It's called a Lunch of Laughs. If you want to do a little stress reduction to help your memory, you can come on out to our luncheon tomorrow. So they raise the money for this, and then at our annual meeting in the spring, we award usually 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors who are going on to college And the key that connects them to our agency's mission is that part of the application process requires them to write a narrative about their experience with somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And at the annual meeting, we introduce the recipients and read their narrative, and it really brings tears to a lot of people's eyes to see and hear the impact that it has on the teenagers and the young kids who are at home, either living with grandma in the house or being a part of the caregiving journey. So these are all the 13 recipients who've received those scholarships from us over the years. All right, and then we have 3 big special events during the year that help us raise awareness and help us raise funds for the center. One of them, and I have a piece of the Alzheimer's art up here, one of them is called Brushstrokes from the Soul, and that's an Alzheimer's art show where in the spring and summer I work with the local care facilities to have them have the residents who have a form of dementia paint art, and then they give it back to me. We frame it all like this. We professionally frame it. We display it. About 60 to 70 pieces are displayed for 2 weeks at Robin Stuckey, right near here, in the month of November for Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And during that 2-week period, we have a public reception, and all of us are there, all our board members and staff. We invite people in to view the art, and we have a silent auction with the art. So a lot of people buy those pieces of art, and actually my guest bedroom in my condo is a whole wall of Alzheimer's art that I bought from those auctions. But I brought one with me today so you could see what that is. And you'll notice if you come up and look at it, that there's a little square card on there that has biographical information about the person who painted it. And I think that's the one thing that makes it so meaningful when people come to the art show and start reading. And this past year we had it on Veterans Day, and so we had a lot of veterans who we had biographical information on. It was just really very cool. We also, on the 4th Thursday of January, hold an annual event that's called A Light to Remember, and that's a luminary tribute event in Centennial Park. We hold a ceremony. It starts at 5:30 so that the sun sets while we're having the ceremony, but we have a very nice, respectful ceremony to pay tribute to the people who are experiencing this illness and to their caregivers who are so dedicated in providing care to them. And the way we raise money for that event is families or friends can buy a luminary for a $5 donation, and then they choose whose name goes on that luminary. And then in the spring, and it's going to be on May 2nd this year, we have our Sweet Memories Chocolate Gala, and that's an evening event at Heritage Palms Country Club. There's chocolate involved because that's my favorite. And by the way, dark chocolate is very good for you. Lots of antioxidants in dark chocolate. So we have Sweet Memories Chocolate Gala, and we have silent and live auctions, and always a fun event at Heritage Palms Country Club, and that's how we also raise funds and raise awareness. And ABC7 is always our partner with that, so Stacy and Len Jennings are our masters of ceremony for that event. All right, so any other questions for me about what our center does or anything I've talked about?
Can you speak briefly about medical research into Alzheimer's disease and maybe the future treatment?
Sure. Well, there's always medical studies going on for Alzheimer's disease, both trying to figure out what is really causing it. You know, do the plaques and tangles cause the disease, the plaques and tangles that are hallmark of the illness, or does the disease cause those plaques and tangles? So there's always all kinds of research going on trying to figure out what really is our greatest risk factors in terms of what I've talked about. And over the years, we've learned more and more about things like healthy lifestyle, all the stuff that I talked about, dancing. In terms of exercise, there's studies that show that dancing is really good for your brain, the coordination and the activity and so forth. So there's a lot of research that focus on that. And meanwhile, there's also always lots of research studies where they're studying new medications that might treat Alzheimer's disease or slow down the progression, and or existing medications that might be prescribed for another illness, like there's inflammation with Alzheimer's disease. So sometimes they test medications that we use for arthritis to see if it will help with Alzheimer's disease. So there's always those kind of clinical research studies going on. And here in Southwest Florida, we have doctors. Dr. Sheriff is one that does a lot of the studies, who is conducting those studies locally. So many of our clients have been involved in research studies and have been able to take the drugs that are now approved for Alzheimer's treatment long before they were even on the market for the general public to buy, because we had the benefit of having research studies going on in our local community, and those people were willing to participate. So in terms of hope for the future, I think that research every day gets us closer to what are some better treatments for Alzheimer's disease and how can we try to prevent it or delay it from happening in the generation coming up that is at such great risk of getting the disease because we have so many baby boomers and they're starting to age. So I think that while we may not see a cure in the next 5 or 10 years, we every day get closer to how can we treat the illness, give people better quality of life, and how might we be able to stop these disease processes from happening so that we don't have so many people experiencing them in years to come. And there's all kinds of things that they test, like vaccines and medications, and they've done invasive studies where they put a shunt in people to drain fluid off the brain to see if that would help. There's just always all kinds of different studies that they're doing. There was a question in the back row, I think, just now. Yes? Yeah.
How soon, if I call, how soon do I have to wait for an appointment to see someone about it?
For
Taking classes in caregiving and how to come out and a social worker to analyze a situation at home.
If you called our office today, one of our social workers will set up an appointment with you at your convenience. It might be tomorrow, it could be as early as next week, they might help you on the phone right now. But that's a really important thing to know, that our center does not have a waiting list. We do not make people wait for our help. Now, there are waiting lists at other agencies for governmental funded programs that you might need for the care part of what you're doing, but our social workers will see you or call you back within a quick amount of time, usually within a day and often quicker than that. Depends on if they're out at support groups and so forth. And if you want to come in and meet with them, they'll set that up. Yes?
Is there any relationship of Parkinson's to Alzheimer's?
Yes. Well, there is to dementia. Sometimes people have both, because remember I said Alzheimer's has a lot of friends and he hangs out with a lot of people. He also hangs out with Parkinson's. So sometimes people have Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. But also Parkinson's disease has dementia associated with it. The longer you have Parkinson's disease and the older you get, the more likely you are to have dementia with the Parkinson's. And remember I said Lewy body dementia is an awful lot like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. So they're all very closely related, and the symptoms and signs can look an awful lot alike. That's why we want people to go to a specialist and get a proper workup. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dottie.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So now, Craig, do you know to hang your keys in the same spot?
I know to
Okay,
hang my keys in
excellent.
the same spot today. Thank you all for coming. I think Dottie did an excellent presentation
you.
for
Thank
a
you.
lot of information that's important to all of us.